ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel, UKMtG, and it's Jordan here, and this is a bit of a different video today. The other day I was quite inspired by an article that Eric Moyer wrote for Channel Fireball with regards to angle shooting. Now, he wrote this article based off his previous one, which I actually read and actually quite enjoyed, but because of some comments that he made about a game that he played, people sort of were a bit negative, saying that he was possibly cheating, where he wasn't. He was perfectly within the rule set and various things like that. And so what he did in this article, he proposed some hypothetical situations, and I wanted to give more my 2 cents on it, and what I would do as a player and various things like that, because I am sort of semi-competitive. I'm not at the pro level, but you know, I have played quite a few competitive rules enforcement level events now, and I do play a variety of decks. So, well, before I get into it, we're going to answer these, you know, obviously in that manner, as if I am at a premier event and it is competitive rules enforcement. And obviously, some things you may not agree with me. Happy to have a discussion in the comment section. Please let me know what your thoughts are, and we can go from there. And yeah, so without further ado, we're just going to jump straight into the article. The first scenario is with regards to playing a vintage storm deck, and you can win by setting up a Burning Wish for a lethal Tendrils of Agony in your sideboard. But you forgot to put the Tendrils of Agony in your sideboard. You know that you cannot legally say that you are casting Burning Wish for Tendrils of Agony, but since your deck is well known, you can allow your opponents to concede because they assume that you have the lethal spell. Do you lead your opponents down a path of assuming that you have a lethal spell, knowing that you do not? Well, it all depends. Certainly you can go down that route. There is nothing wrong with it. There's nothing against the rules in Magic. Obviously you can't name the spell that you haven't got. But I've had this happen to me before. I've actually been on the receiving end of this, where I had an opponent who cast Tooth and Nail for the Emrakul and Xenagos God combo, where they immediately gain haste and double strike, and it is horrific. However, the one time I did that, I made him play it out, and it was game 2, and he went, "Alright, I'm casting Tooth and Nail, I'm going for it," and I went, "Yeah, okay," and he freaked out and conceded because I wouldn't quit. Because it's all about you as a player and whether you're willing to play out the combo. Same thing happened at the Mega and Modern event this weekend versus the Vizier Druid combo, and what essentially happened was my opponent managed to gain infinite life, and I told him, you can't gain infinite, you got to select a number, to which he said, fine, 100 million, and then looked at me, and I went, okay, and I wrote 100 million down, and he said, you gonna play? I said, yeah. I said, you haven't got lethal yet, and he went, okay, and then proceeded to play the game, annoying him greatly because I was removing pieces of the combo, such as the Druid or the Vizier, and so he couldn't get infinite mana. And he eventually did get it, but it was about 10-15 turns later, so we'd already been in the game for an extra 15-20 minutes, so he was quite unhappy about it. I just carried on as normal. I then, you know, sideboarded and carried on, and he was more unhappy with me that I played it out rather than immediately conceding. But that's just me as a person. So yes, do you lead your opponents down the path? You certainly can. You can certainly announce Burning Wish, but unfortunately you can't do it. So I'm just gonna have to move on to the next one. So that's the way I'd do it. You're playing a graveyard based strategy and your opponents cast Rest in Peace. You move your cards to exile, but then realise that your opponent never announced the Rest in Peace triggered ability. Do you move your cards back to the graveyard? Personally, no, that's me. The second they put Rest in Peace down, well, to be fair, whenever I play Rest in Peace, cast Rest in Peace, exile, and I say exile the graveyards, that's me as a player. If my opponent doesn't, you know, if they've exiled theirs, it's pretty much they've exiled mine. You know, why would you try and go down this angle? Yes, they should announce it, but it's Rest in Peace. It's been around long enough. We all know what it does. Come on. You're playing before the policy changes for Amonkhet, which now requires name cards to be unambiguous. So you're playing Grizzle Shawbrand, which is a deck you can win by drawing a ton of cards with Grizzlebrand, discarding lands to Borymagros Enrage's activated ability. Your opponent casts a Pithing Needle and names Borymagros, a distinct card that is irrelevant to the matchup and does not prevent your combo. Would you have still gone for the combo? Before the policy changes, yes I would. Before the policy changes, it did state specifically you had to name the specific card. It was a pain in the butt, but you had the option to try and speak to the judge to get the correct card name. I believe that was the way it was. So realistically, there is no excuse. If you're playing at that level, I mean, certainly you can call a judge. Yes, you're in the moment. Yes, it's going to take up precious minutes, but come on, you know, it was fine. Now the rules are a bit more unambiguous. You can say, oh, your boy, you know, you can say your Borymagros creature or something like that, and it's obviously you're talking about the cards on the board. So yeah, so that one's pretty straightforward. I mean, you should have just called a judge on that one, but yeah. On to number 4. Again, you're playing before the policy change for Amonkhet, but this time you're tapped out and your opponent goes to beginning your combat phase, where they crew a vehicle. Even though you have no interaction and nothing else has changed on the board between the beginning of combat and declaring attackers, you are aware the rules state their exact wording implies that they actually have declared tax step and can no longer crew or remember their beginning of combat triggers. Do you allow them to crew the vehicle or call the judge? I believe this came down to, I think it was Protor Island, where the guy said attacks, meaning, you know, going to attack step, but that can be interpreted as declaring attackers. Now, it's a very tricky one, this. You know, if I'm in the lead, do I want him to get an advantage? No. But I think the simple way is to call the judge. It is, you know, it's kind of for clarity reasons. Even if you're not in the feature match area and you're kind of concerned, just call the judge. It's very simple on this, and get him to make the decision and go by that decision. Quite frankly, that's very easy. 5. Your opponent has the Scarab and 2 zombified creatures in play when you pass the turn to them. They slide a card off their library and put it face down on the table. They have not looked at it yet, but then they announce they're going to scry too. You think they initially forgot the trigger and proceed to their draw step. Do you let them scry? Bonus question: do you call them out to Twitch chat for missing the trigger? No, I would not let them. I would not let them scry. If they've picked the card up off the top of the library, it indicates they've gone to the draw step. In my opinion, that's, you know, you're playing the Scarab Gog. You know there's an upkeep trigger, so you should be remembering that trigger immediately. If you go to the top of your library and you've put 1 off the top, so you've not even gone for 2, indicating the scry. You've gone for 1. It would look like the draw step trigger. So, you know, personally, I wouldn't let him scry. That's just me. That's me in competitive mode. You know, I wouldn't allow it. Number 6, your opponent has lethal already on board and an overkill lethal sorcery speed spell in hand, and you just need to pass the turn to kill you. You cast a spell that requires all your mana, and your opponent begins to untap, draws, and plays the lethal spell. You have no mana available to interact and no cards in hand to prevent your opponent's play, but your opponent was unclear about the board state. Technically, you never passed the turn to them. Do you call the judge to get the sorcery speed spell shuffled away? Ooh, this is a bit of a tricky one. Let's see. So, right, let's make this standard relevancy. So, they got Banefire in hand. You're going to cast it for lethal regardless of what they do. You know, just... You haven't, you know, you kind of, unfortunately, it kind of comes down to you've got to go with your opponent. They've got to say pass or indicate in some manner that they are passing the turn. To be fair, I often do. I mean, luckily I play a deck that runs an end step trigger most of the time. So with Northern Sisters deck, so you know you kind of have that thing. Anything at the end step, no, okay, untap. You know, so I tend to actually talk through my turns. You know, it's kind of, I'll be honest, this is where the angle shooting thing I kind of don't agree with, where you're kind of sort of using the rules to keep yourself alive or deliberately win and save yourself. So do I call a judge? Personally, I wouldn't. If I'm talking for the top 8, it's probably a different story entirely. You know, you could probably, if this ever occurs, I'm sure someone will bring this back to bite me. But anyway, that's kind of, I personally wouldn't. But yeah, so you know, it's kind of a bit of ambiguous on that one, but I'd say no. You are facing lethal with your opponent at 9 life and an ambitious Etherborn untapped. You have a long tusk cub with 4 1/1 counters and a cartouche of ambition on it. And you have 2 energy in the pool. You cast larger than life and attack with your only hope of winning being that your opponent adds up the combat math wrong and concedes, or that your teammates win both their matches and your game is no longer relevant. Your opponent extends for the handshake even though your attack would only put them to 2 life. Do you accept the concession? Yes. If they're conceding, if you clarify that they're conceding rather than they're saying good game to you because they've got you dead, you know, fine. Do I accept the concession? Yes. In competitive rules, I would. I'd probably tell them afterwards whether that's allowed. You know, probably after slip signing. But yeah, it's kind of, you know, if they've chosen to concede, it's a voluntary decision on their part. That's the reason why you should tend to always track your life total as best you can. I prefer to do it with paper, and I like to always add up the combat math as well. But I'm one of these players that will sit there and actually work things out as my opponent's doing things. So I tend to add it up and do everything and make sure I've got a final figure in my head of what's happening on the board state anyway. So yeah, I would accept the concession. You are playing Titan Shift in the quarterfinals of a Modern Grand Prix, and you cast Lethal Scapeshift. Your opponent's only way of interacting is by destroying one of your mountains with a beast within, while the Valakut and the Molten Pinnacle triggers are on the stack. Your opponent casts Beast Within, destroys one of your mountains, which would make Valakut deal no damage, but your opponent concedes anyway because they're not aware. Do you capitalize on their misunderstanding? That is a bit of a difficult one. I would say, would I call it? Yes, I would. Yeah, I would keep going. If they don't cast the spell, they're not going to do it. If they have missed a chance to get it in play, and if so, this is on the understanding that they've not cast the spell. So if they haven't cast the spell, you win, fine. If they then realise after the fact, or you talk about after the match, then fine. It's another way for them to learn a life lesson, and especially a rules lesson about Valakut. I mean, to be fair, Valakut is a bit tricky because the amount of players I have seen that think Valakut is a mountain or have seen it to perceive it as a mountain itself, so it counts itself and it doesn't. You need Valakut and 5 other mountains for it to activate. So yeah, it's a clever decision though, but yeah, I think I probably would capitalise on their misunderstanding if they've not cast a spell. Your opponent casts Triton Tactics after you declare attackers and blocks one of your creatures. In a way so that neither creature dies in combat. They do not acknowledge the delayed trigger of Titan Tactics. After you draw for your turn, your opponent notices that you untapped your creature, and the delay triggered on Titan Tactics says it should not untap. Do you tap your creature? This is interesting. It's very hard to decide because in competitive rules, it depends what's happened in the turn. If this is being noticed, say in combat, so you've already moved to the combat phase, obviously you get a warning and various things like that, but things may have progressed further in the turn and the judge can rewind. So a simple answer is you call the judge over and he should be the one to sort it out, not yourselves. it's kind of a bit of a awkward one on that one, because to be fair, it's kind of bad on your opponent because it's his spell, so he should have realised the trigger. At the same time, if you've negligently not remembered it, it's kind of bad. But to be fair, a judge will probably issue a warning to both parties and would try and rewind it as best he can. If he can't, then there's going to have to be a ruling and various things like that, and so that's a bit of an awkward one to answer. I personally would just call the judge over. It's a simple way of doing it. Number 10, you're playing Mono Black Devotion in Theros Standard, and your opponent names Underworld connections with their Pithing Needle. Do you tell them that the Swamp was the card they should have named for the effect that they are presuming going forward, and let them change the name on the card? No, you don't let them. You can tell them when you activate the ability. When they question it, you say, no, you named Underworld connections. Where this is quite a common interaction. This is well-known interaction, in fact, of Underworld connections, because it enchants the land. The land gains the ability. In fact, I believe it even states it on the card that the land gains the ability. Let me just quickly have a look. Yes, the enchanted land has tap, pay 1 life, and you get to draw a card. So you really should be naming the land, not the enchantment. So it's kind of a bit harsh. You know, some people won't agree with me on that. But I would tell them after the fact that they should have named the Swamp. This is because it's in competitive play and you've got to have every advantage you can get. So that's my 2 cents on that one. Number 11, you're playing Blue Black Mill at the PBTQ despite the process of all your friends and loved ones. Yeah, this sounds like a familiar person I know. In this round, you're going up against Lantern Control, locked in game 3 of a matchup that is so slow that you may actually last until the expansion of the universe risks past space-time itself. If it were not for the match clock. Your opponent has an empty library, but can prevent themselves from decking with an Academy Ruins. They have a Leyline Sanctity in play, preventing you from tagging them with Ravenous Trap in your hand. You are now in extra turns, and you show your opponents the Ravenous Trap in your hand, even though you are the only legal target for the spell because of Leyline Sanctity. You never announce the target or tap mana, but they concede when you show them the card. Do you tell your opponents that you could not have targeted them with spell because of the Leyline and take the draw? If your opponent... Oh, how do I go down this route? This is very tempting. If your opponent chooses not to read the card and not understand the fact of the board state, and he concedes, that's on him. That's on him. It's entirely on him. I would then argue it afterwards. I would then maybe tell him afterwards, but the fact is that he really should read the card. It's that prof say, what is it? Reading the card explains the card. Magic is a very big game. Not every player knows every card. Every time I hear a rough new one, or even some of the ones in standard, I just want to double check and make sure I'm aware of how things work. So there's nothing wrong with reading cards. There's nothing wrong with asking your opponent allowing you to read the card and understand what's about to happen. So if he's conceded, it's his fault. He should have read the card and just double checked it didn't say targeted player. Apart from that, you know, it's up to you how you want to run with that one. But it's a very difficult one on that front. Your opponent casts a Narcolepsy on your Primeval Titan. They remember for 10 turns to tell you to tap Primeval Titan on your upkeep. Good opponent. But the 11th turn they forget. Do you tap your Titan? Again, this comes down to if it's an opponent's trigger, which it is. Your opponent should be alright, you should be remembering. Let's be honest, it's not exactly a hard card. At the beginning of each cup create, you get to, if the creature is untapped, which it will be from the untapped step, you get to tap it again. So I think it's quite an obvious card what it does. So you should really tap the Titan. I mean, come on. I mean, this should be, you know, it's they remind you of 10 turns on the trot, and they've not announced it on the 11th. Yes, it's kind of their fault, but at the same time, it's not like it's a spell that's been cast the turn before and has disappeared. There's an enchanted card on your creature. You should be able to remind yourself, so I would tap it. 2-13. Your opponent casts an Esper Charm, targeting themselves. You think they're intending to use the draw cards mode, but the only mode in Esper Charm that target player is the discard one. Do you force them to discard? It's really awkward. It depends on the wording, I believe. No, because it's simple, right? They're going to use it to draw cards, right? The targeted mode does say target player, but the fact is it has an option or draw 2 cards. So it is, you can draw cards. The fact is that you can try and argue them that you force them to discard. So no, I wouldn't try and force them to discard cards. After you read it, it just quite simply say the only draw cards option is for the player casting it. It's not target player draws 2 cards. So yeah, I wouldn't force it on that one. Number 14. Your opponent casts a Bedlam Reveler, and you let it resolve before realizing that you can bounce it with a Reflector Mage. Oh god, that card. In response to the trigger, and force them to discard it. Do you blame them for using non-English cards and misunderstanding the announcement of their actions before asking them to rewind? This is interesting. Funnily enough, when we went to GP Birmingham for the Modern event last year, in one of the matchups the day before, I versed a player who was playing a entirely fold out promo Jund deck. The problem is of course a lot of the cards were foreign and they're not the same art because they were promo cards, and so he was casting them and I was saying, oh, which card is it? And he was using his best English to describe the card to me. It got to the point where I asked the judge to come watch the game because I was unhappy with the explanations he was given for the card, which the judge was then watching the game closely, and the guy seemed to be a bit more careful with the words he was using. So it depends entirely on the situation and your opponent and various things like that. I would request the judge to sort of come to the table and explain which card it was. I mean, a Bedlam Reveler, I believe, you know, a Bedlam Reveler hasn't had a promo card, so it should be the same art. It should be announced really well, and yes, you do have a chance to respond with a Reflector Mage. I assume you must have had an Ether Valor or something to do that. But it's kind of awkward, that one. It depends on the turn. But the simple way again is just get a judge over. They'll certainly sort things out for you. So that is it. That's all 14 hypothetical scenarios. I'm about to say Eric goes into a good explanation on the scenarios and about how they are defined later on in the article. Highly recommend it. It's kind of one of these things. It's a very tricky thing is angle shooting. If you're playing at the competitive level, you've got to use any advantage you can get in a game to try and get ahead, without trying to break the rules, of course. The problem is most people don't play like this. Most of us, as he says, have duty and honour and various things like that, because we're all playing a game at the end of the day, and you know, winning isn't everything. But yeah, so it was a very good article, and I'm going to link the article in the description box down below. Please go check it out. And yeah, as I said, if you have any comments to anything I've said in the video, let me know in the comment section down below. And yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you actually like me responding to articles of this nature and various things like that, I've quite enjoyed it. It's quite therapeutic getting my opinion across. So yeah, let me know what you think, thoughts and feelings are on that as well. And yeah, without that being said, I've been your host, Jordan, signing off here from UKMtG. Catch you later.